Well, it's a pleasure and an honor to be here at the National Constitution Center and to be able to have a conversation with Richard. I will restrain my temptation, having read so much of your work about the presidents, to ask you about this current president, but instead to talk about this new book of Richard's, which is a remarkable book about an absolutely, I think, astonishing series of events in 1948-49. It was particularly important to me. I lived several years in Berlin, both as a student and then teaching at the Free University, which was founded in precisely this period. So, and one of the things that was really one of the major events every year in the years that I was in Berlin was the German-American Friendship Day, which was held at Tempelhof Airport. And the spirit of it, there was always recognition of the men who were involved in the airlift. Berlin was a great place to be an American throughout even the roughest times in the post-war period because of the airlift. So I think we'll have some very interesting things to say. It's a remarkably interesting book, both from looking at things on the macro level, international politics, American domestic politics, but also a human dimension, which is absolutely central to this. I think before we begin, though, we're going to see a brief film about giving some film coverage from the period.
What we'll see is just a couple of minutes of newsreels from the period, American newsreels. Some of you will recognize voices like Edward R. Murrow and Walter Cronkite, but it gives a picture of the political situation, which was that Germany was divided into 4 occupation zones, that is American, Russian, British, and French, and then the British, French, and American sections were essentially merged at a point so that you had what we all came to know as East and West Germany. Because of its symbolic importance, the city of Berlin was also divided into 4 sectors. And shortly after, Berlin was rubble. And it was a city of women, children, and old men and wounded men. And people were literally living in caves. For food, they were dependent on agriculture from the eastern zone, which surrounded it. Berlin was 110 miles inside East Germany. There came a point where Joseph Stalin was determined to drive out the Americans and the British and French. Part of it just pride, but part of it espionage. He did not want a Western window into the East in the middle of his territory, nor did he want a window where his people could see any of the West, and decided to try to drive out the Allies by blockading the land, rail, and water routes into the city, leaving the Allies with the option of trying to feed more than 2 million people by air. And by air, I mean planes like DC-3s, which could hold only 3 tons, and DC-4s, C-54s, which could hold 10 tons. I'll also mention that I wrote this because I was looking to write about a subject that I felt was about the America that I grew up in, what I thought of being an American, as opposed to what many people think now. And there could never be a better example of us at our best than this great humanitarian adventure, which had great political implications, but also was done basically to save the people who had been trying to kill us and we had been trying to kill. And these newsreels give you a sense of what it looked like during that time.
June 1948 blockade.
Trains, barges, and road traffic was stopped.
The threat of starvation for 2 million citizens of West Berlin. Blockade imposed by the communists to force withdrawal of the Western Allied forces.
Is it possible that the Americans will be forced out of Berlin?
We are not going to be forced out of Berlin.
In your opinion, is there any danger of war, General?
I would not like to minimize the seriousness of the situation in Germany. In such a situation, there is always a danger. I consider it a small danger because the peoples involved do not really want war.
The people of Berlin headed for the Place de la République again last week to protest communist terror tactics directed against this city's freedom. Over 250,000 of them streamed in from all 4 sectors to make this the greatest of Berlin's freedom rallies. Here by the ruins of the Reichstag, symbol of German democracy, they assembled to put their case before the world. You people of the world, you people in America, in England, in France, in Italy, look at this city and see that you may not abandon this city, that you cannot abandon this city.
But the West does not withdraw. Instead, the Berlin Airlift is launched by a combined Allied task force.
The Air Force assigned more than 300 airplanes and more than 20,000 men to the airlift. And Britain made a large contribution of both aircraft and personnel. It was an operation without precedent and a severe test of precision flying, of logistics, maintenance, communications, and weather service.
The air corridor to Berlin was narrow and dangerous. With 40 to 50 airplanes going through it simultaneously, they had to be accurately spaced. And until the late stages of the airlift, they were flown at 5 different levels, the levels being 500 feet apart. This called for extremely precise air traffic control.
Some of us had bombed Berlin, and now we were trying to keep the same city alive. It meant that we had to get more from each airplane and from each man than ever before.
The biggest item was coal for the utilities. It was packed in GI barracks bags. Second biggest item was made into pumpernickel, Schultzstangel, and Kuchen. We call it bread. And milk for the kids. Then medicines. Every ounce of cargo was checked.
A new agreement signed in New York between the USSR and the United States reaffirmed the removal of all restrictions on communications, transportation, and trade between West Berlin and the western zones of Germany.
Attention, attention. We have a communique about the lifting of the Berlin blockade. It was officially announced by the Big Four powers at 2 o'clock this afternoon that the blockade will be lifted on May 12th.
Correct time is 1 minute past midnight. The gates are being opened now, and the first vehicles are going through.